It offers a deeper analysis from different sources, and it gives a space, I think, for people's voices to be heard.
Welcome to The Real News. I'm joined by Antonia Juhasz, the author of the recently published book, The Tyranny of Oil, the world's most powerful industry and what we must do to stop it. Antonia is an award-winning author, a policy analyst, a commentator, and an activist. Her previous book, The Bush Agenda, Invading the World, One Economy at a Time. It sounds like she's a force to reckon with. Welcome, Antonia.
Thank you for having me. A pleasure to be here.
The policy that Barack Obama might be adopting with his new administration, what would you be saying if you were one of those advisors? You had worked in Congress before, you had been a congressional aide.
Well, there's a number of policies that he's proposed that I want to make sure he actually puts in place. One of the most important would be his promise during the election that he would undo an enormous deregulatory loophole that was put in place by the oil industry together with the nation's leading investment banks and Enron to deregulate in 2000 key energy futures trades. Actually, it was an entire deregulation of derivatives trading, which also led to the subprime mortgage crisis. That's an aside. And part of that deregulatory effort was crude oil futures markets, which led to, quite directly, the massive run-up in the price of crude, really at the behest of and servicing the interests of big oil and the surviving investment banks in the United States, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley. These are two banks that have essentially all but morphed into oil companies, owning oil fields, owning tankers, owning pipelines, and owning the exchange with BP, Total, and Shell, on which crude oil futures are now predominantly traded, a deregulated exchange. Obama has promised to regulate that exchange and undo this loophole, which is referred to as the Enron loophole.
You have been fairly critical of the fact that the oil companies have not been properly regulated. Yes. In terms of regulation, what kind of things would you like to see?
Well, so here's a couple of areas that Obama has said that he has made pledges for that we have to hold him to account. One is, there's just an array of areas that involve things like taxation. So he has said that he will implement a windfall profits tax on the oil industry, that he will increase taxation for U.S. corporations in general, and that he will eliminate the vast and mass subsidies given to this industry put in place by the Bush administration. We also need to see re-regulation of everything from where the companies are allowed to produce to how they refine oil, to even gas stations and how and if we continue to allow the collusion that's happening on at the gas station level and at the pricing level. We also have to see that money then directed towards making it immediately possible to reduce consumption of oil. And that, to me, I think the number one recommendation that I would make to President-elect Obama is to take that money and immediately invest it in a mass public works program for public transit. In the United States, we have essentially no public transit system, and that would be a way to get people to work and also to immediately reduce our consumption on oil and oil products.
The controversy over reducing the dependency on foreign oil, is that a realistic conversation at this point in the United States?
There's a caveat that both Obama and even McCain made to reducing our dependence on foreign oil. It was that the United States would reduce its dependence on foreign oil and increase its dependence on Canadian oil, implying that Canadian oil is American oil, really, at the end of the day. And that implies an increased reliance, of course, on oil being produced in the Canadian tar sands, an incredibly environmentally destructive mode of production, and not only environmentally destructive at the point of production, but what the oil companies now are trying to do is to increase the refining of that dirtier crude in the United States. The good news about that is that it is unifying movements against tar sand production across North America, both within the United States and in Canada. To undo our quote-unquote dependence on foreign oil probably has far more to do with military policy of the United States and undoing in particular, the 8 years in which the Bush administration implemented the largest realignment of the U.S. military since the Cold War. I would argue right along oil routes and oil transit routes. Of course, the Middle East is the most obvious area, but there also is, for example, Africa. The Bush administration just initiated the new centralized U.S. military focus on Africa, AFRICOM. This is based on EUROCOM, which is the European Central Command, CENTCOM, which is the Central Asian Command. These are the two areas where the United States has fought wars, right? Now we have a new centralized U.S. military command structure for Africa. The U.S. oil industry is heavily engaged in Africa. We now have had mass arms transfers from the United States into Africa, training of African forces by the U.S. military. Essentially, we are prepared for a proxy war to be fought by Africans, with Africans, between the United States and the Chinese over oil and over power. That has now all been sort of put into place. It is going to take a lot of work to extricate ourselves out of this situation. The first is going to be probably not only an announcement of a redirection of policy, but a meaningful implementation of really shifting ourselves away from this product. It's going to be the only way, I think, to head off wars, future wars. To reduce the power of this industry over our government, it's going to take reducing our use and dependence on their product.
This is the sort of thing we can build right now without anyone else's permission from the government or from the business community. It's the power's in our hands.
If we're not going to sleepwalk into more wars and into environmental disaster, we think we need to start with a television news network that won't bow to pressure and has the courage to seek facts. And that means independent economics. And that's why we need you.
Real hope means facing a complex reality. Your tax-deductible donation makes it possible. Please contribute. Visit therealnews.com.